excited to have this happening here. Before I get started, I want to do something that we have instituted doing for the last couple of years at all of our public gatherings, and do our Indigenous land acknowledgement. Abrons Art Center is situated on the Lenape island of Manhattan in Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland. We pay respect to the Lenape people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We offer our care and gratitude to the land, water, and air of Lenape-Hoking, and we are committed to resisting colonialism and imbalance with Mother Earth through our support of Indigenous-led programming and Indigenous artistic practices. After that. This acknowledgement was designed in partnership with Emily Johnson in the Lenape Center, and Emily happens to be an artistic advisor to the Creative Summit coming up in November, so it's a nice overlap. Emily is an artist in residence here at Abrons. I don't normally do this, but I really want to take a couple minutes just to tell you about where you're sitting, because it feels so relevant to the topic that you are all here to listen to tonight. There's a lot of good energy in these walls, and I wanted to give you a little bit of history about where you are. Abrons Art Center is part of the Henry Street Settlement, which is a social service agency here on the Lower East Side. It's 126 years old now. This playhouse was built in 1915, or started to be built. I think it was opened in 1916. So it's been here a long time. And the story behind it is that our founder, the founder of Henry Street Settlement, Lillian Wald, she was a nurse, lived a couple blocks away, started the settlement in the 1890s, and she was friends with these two eccentric sisters, Alice and Irene Lewison, who loved to put on pageants out on Grand Street with all of the children in the neighborhood. And so Lillian, who was this badass, well, it's gay pride month, she was a badass lesbian, she convinced the sisters to build this playhouse for the settlement. But what ended up happening is Alice and Irene had eyes on Broadway, so they wanted to put on their own shows here. And the neighborhood wanted to put shows on here, and so instantly there was this tension that kind of erupted, even before the first brick was laid here. So who was this space for? Was it a community art center? Was it an experimental art center? Who was allowed to be in here? And that's a tension that still exists today. It's the best part of my job. And I just came across this historic document. I won't go into how I found it, but I think it's super fascinating, and it kind of, I think it will be a nice element to the history of this space and why this conversation is so relevant to happen in this room. We found this in some old documents in the Playhouse basement a long time ago. It's from 1930, and it says, "At first, it was hard to persuade groups who were anxious to promote their ideas that a play would be a good means of education. Then, after a few successful dramatizations of local problems, we began to be beset by the request, 'Can't you do a play about ... And our answer is always, yeah, sure, if you can find the people who will put it on. Last summer, the union leaders in a local pencil company were pretty bewildered by this reply, and they asked us when they asked us if we could dramatize their strike. But our members make pencils; they're not actors. Never been in a theater, most of them. Besides, they're busy picketing. Nevertheless, after we spent 2 weeks becoming acquainted with the workers as they came off the picket lines, heard their stories, ate lunch with them, waited for meetings in the union hall, we managed not only to get enough material to make up a script, but also to convince a dozen of them that they should play themselves in a crowd scene. Specific parts, like the boss, the foreman, members of the NLRB, were played by some of our neighborhood actors. But it was the presence of the union members coming out of the audience and finally speaking ad lib from the stage that gave the play its vitality. So usually a production will stem from some organization, some club or group which has a cause to promote, but even that's no rule. As we write this, we are embarking on a medicine show because socialized medicine is in the air, and more people in the neighborhood are beginning to question the economic aspects of their own problems of health. So I wanted to share that because that was 1930. We sometimes think what we're all doing is really new, and it's not, right? One of the best parts about my job here is that we are an experimental art center, but we're also a part of this broader agency and this broader discourse in the neighborhood. And we have the opportunity to invite the community into our space, but we also have the opportunity to go out to these other divisions in our agency and promote arts in other settings. One great, and one of the best aspects of this is that we're able to either be invited into rooms where artists aren't always at the table, or sometimes we push ourselves into the room. And it enables us to get artists into a discourse that sometimes arts organizations struggle to create a platform for artists. And one great example of that brings me back to the beginning, which is Emily Johnson, who after about 2 years ago, she came and we started working on the land acknowledgement. And since that time, we've actually engaged the broader agency. We now have the land acknowledgement posted at all 17 sites across the agency. And she came to a staff meeting with 300 staff people and talked about a decolonization process that the agency will soon be undergoing. So this is one way that we can bring artists into a broader discourse that enables us to maybe bolster an argument and create some problem solving that might not otherwise be available. Creative Time does that like wonderfully, amazingly well, and that's what we're here to talk about. So I want to invite Justine up to the stage, and I hope that tonight's conversation is great, and I hope you have a productive time. Come on up.
For those of you that do not know me, I am Justine Ledwig, the Executive Director of Creative Time, and I am thrilled to be sharing this beautiful evening with all of you. This year's summit, titled Speaking Truth, celebrates 10 years of the Creative Time Summit. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to the second of 3 discussions, this one titled Speaking Truth, Economics and Sovereignty. These talks serve as a precursor to our multi-day convening, which will be taking place this year, November 14th through 16th. And you're hearing this first. It is happening at Cooper Union this year at the Great Hall, and we're very excited about that. I'd like to take a moment to thank those involved in making this year's summit possible, with major support for the 2019 summit provided by the Trust for Mutual Understanding and the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation, our hotel partner, Sister City, and of course, Abrons Art Center for giving us this beautiful venue tonight and being such a wonderful partner. It's so fitting that we are here for this talk. And I must also acknowledge the amazing team at Creative Time. Working with you is a true honor and a privilege. And in particular, I have to call out Alex Winters for orchestrating this very special night tonight. And also a huge thank you to the Creative Time board. You are fearless, and I am so grateful to work with you. And now, please welcome to the stage tonight's speakers, Gregory, Sholette, Zina, Saro-Wiwa, and Andrea Carlson.
Wow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Justine. And Craig, that was a great introduction. It's a funny thing, my first group exhibition was here at Henry Street Settlement, of course not here, but in the Abrons Art Center, in the windows looking into the interior. And I did a piece called Savage Vision, in which I talked about gentrification that was coming to the city, into this neighborhood in particular in 1981. So I feel a real connection to this space. I also want to mention that this evening, just before I got here, I went by the new museum where the workers are. They voted to have a union, and they're struggling with the administration to actually make things happen, like fair wages. So that's happening right as we meet here. Just keep an eye out for that because we want to support their good work. So we have 2 amazing artists here with both different and in some ways very similar practices, and we're going to get into those details. Zina Saro-Wiwa and Andrea Carlson, and we decided the first thing to do would be to let them give you a little sense of their own work. So they're going to talk a few minutes, show a few images of what their practice is. Zina, would you like to start? Yeah.
Bonjour, Nindanoy Makaidak, Andrea Carlson, Indigenous Cause, Jawa Gwanyashik, Anishinaabe Wong, Indigenous Cause, Mikanak Nindodim, Miigwech Bizadawiek. So I just did my Ojibwe speech protocol. I speak the Ojibwe language. I told you my name and where I'm from and that I'm Turtle Clan and I'm Ojibwe. And I live in Chicago now. Thank you guys for welcoming me to Lenape King, our distant relatives, tribally and nationally. I guess when it comes to my work, right away, one of the things I think is important to understand, to kind of understand the entire body of my work, is the idea of stories or narratives and how their relationship to objects. When I was in grad school, I had learned the Ojibwe language, I had learned a lot of traditional stories. I was very inspired by these things, and I realized that so much of storytelling is this lived thing. It's reinterpreted and reperformed by each storyteller. And what was I doing as an artist, taking these stories and making static objects where the imagery didn't really move. That was a problem that I had early on that I started to play with, and it took the various forms in my painting. And then later I started making videos because that had the movement in it. So that's generally a little bit about my work. It's about how stories have diaspora. Even objects do. I had a teacher in undergrad who once told me that oftentimes people will come into possession of an object that they don't know the cultural story for, they don't know what it is, and that objects show up at places way before the colonizers, way before settlers, way before the actual people that know the narrative of those objects. They'll have the objects and they won't know anything about it, but that's just how cultures work. And so then I started thinking about objects as surrogates for cultural exchange and extraction and cultural narratives. So I guess that's it in a nutshell.
That's great. Yeah, and we'll come back to those themes because they're much remarkable things.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Abrons Centre and Creative Time for having me up on stage. I always have a certain way of entering into what I do, talking about what I do and what my work is about, but I think that I feel inspired to talk about the idea of home. I think that's a lot of what my work is ultimately about. It's about trying to find a home and to control some stories about where home is. I think it might be highly personal, even though it doesn't really centre my body in the work. So I am British, Nigerian, and I live in Brooklyn. I've been here for like 10 years. I'm from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, which is one of the largest oil-producing regions of the world, and has suffered as a result of big oil and colonialism in some very interesting ways. I come from journalism. I used to work at the BBC, and I came to art about 9 years ago and turned to art as a way to tell stories about who I am, where I'm from, or the places I think I'm from. I think I'm always having questions about what it means to be home, and literally home in your body, home in your emotions, but also home in terms of where I was born and the way the story has played out in a place like the Niger Delta. So a lot of the work that I suppose I'm going to be talking about here hasn't always been about the Niger Delta, but the work that's showing up behind me and that we'll be talking about is there. I think it fits into the remit of this particular conversation. And so really it's about, big oil has been the dominant story of the Niger Delta. And I do always have to mention the death of my father. I never mean to censure him all the time, but I think he is a huge reason I became an artist. He was killed in 1995, executed by the Nigerian government for his fight against big oil. And I think that story and the story of big oil has always dominated where I was from, and I never had the chance to really control that conversation. And so I do think that art was my way of entering into a space like the Niger Delta and allow other forces to come through me in order to tell the story of the place. And I think that's why I was interested in art, because I think that a lot of people that were attracted to that particular region are often either oil workers or the other end of that dynamic, which is NGO workers or journalists. And they are part of the same dynamic and the same conversation that produces the same knowledges about the place. But I wanted to enter the place as an artist and broker and rupture the storytelling process and allow other things to inform my storytelling through establishing an art space and through my own works that I produce there. So that's all I'll say for now.
It's fabulous, yeah. I mean, there's so many ways that your work connects to each other and speaks to the present moment that we're in. Storytelling is clearly one of them. The use of materials and objects is really another one. I also made a couple of notes, things like collaboration, because I think that's a part of your work, relationship to history, and imagining futures, as well as eating. So let me ask a kind of broad general question for both of you to answer, and maybe I'll get more specific with you. How would you say that memory and its economies of power, and by that I mean the ways some people have power, some people are powerless, some are visible, some are invisible in those kinds of exchanges that leave some people out. How would you say that kind of economy of memory works its way through your various practices?
Well, I'm interested in where memory sits and how it's explicit. I don't always think it's in the written word, I think it sits in the body. I think literally, I mean, we talked about eating, it's in the physicality, in the way that you eat. It's in the way that you pray. It's explicit in so many other ways. There are many stories. I mean, the idea of memory is like, well, which stories are you supposed to tell? Which is the important story to tell? And so I'm just saying that there are other kinds of stories that are just as important in terms of connecting the people that are there with the outside world. So we're talking about the economy of memory, but I also think that, you know, what are the actors within that economy that we're privileging? And I'm sort of challenging what the ideas are that are important to remember and bringing new ideas to the fore, hopefully, and having them as actors within that economy.
I mean, I totally agree with that. One of the problems, at least with storytelling, we'll get to memory in a second, is I think that for a lot of people of color and Native people, that is always the assumed content from various institutions. I was told very early on, when I was just starting out my career, that, oh, you're such a great storyteller, and it was kind of inferred because I'm Native, I'm a great storyteller, and I don't know if that's true or not, but there is that, and I know that there's a lot of Native authors even who say that they are approached that way about storytelling, but then the honest side of that is that the stories is where I live, that's the things that inspire and feed and teach me, and so it's one of these kind of, you know, it's a double-edged thing. As far as memory goes, I think for, you know, to speak kind of collectively as a group, it's very easy to be invisible as a Native person. Those histories are all submerged, all intentionally submerged. You don't have to understand. You don't have to know whose land you win. We have land acknowledgement statements now, but it's not uncommon to come across people that don't know whose land that they reside on and that don't know the histories of the place where the real deep histories. They know the colonial histories. I was in Boston last year and I knew every place in Boston because those are the histories that were taught in school. So as far as my work goes, when it comes to memory and imagination, we know how images work. We know how images can propagandize ideas. We know that images can hurt people. We know that the Washington R word's a team name We know that the Kansas City Chiefs and these various sports mascots, we know that those images hurt Native people. They've done studies. They know that people can be hurt by imagery of, say, the Western film genre. We know that images can cause pain. So part of what I want to do with my work is, can images be the inverse of that? Can we heal? Can we make something formal and beautiful that sparks a curiosity where someone wants to dig further than just the surface of the painting?
I was just inspired by what you were saying about objects and storytelling, people forgetting. I just think that also, certainly within Nigeria, there's some issues with how we remember history and, you know, how we tell those histories. And right now I'm curating a show at my gallery, which is called Project Space, and I'm showing contemporary traditional art made by a carver that lives in Ogoni land, my ancestral village. And you know, it's really interesting. I really wanted to dig more into what some of these masks were about, and I found myself having to write to a succession of European anthropologists and art historians to sort of find some information that had been written down. I also, of course, interviewed like the carvers themselves, but the nature of the information that comes out of it is really flat. Really interesting, but it also made me understand that, in a sense, there is this opportunity for, I hate to say the word invention, because it means that anyone can come and invent, and you know, just because I'm an Ogoni woman, is it any better that I can come in and also kind of like, you can use the word invent, or you can say grow the history or grow the storytelling, but there are some issues with the actual fact, the actual information that has to do with the way that we metabolize our stories and then share our stories. And so I'm always thinking about how we tell those stories, and the, you know, the opportunity that I have as someone who's going in there and thinking about what's going on there from an artistic perspective and a cultural perspective, because that's the perspective no one ever talks about. All we hear about is oil, we hear about militancy, but we don't hear about how our stories, you know, the repository of stories inside objects, and what these objects, what stories that they can tell you. But you know, I think there's a lot of desires around objects and a lot of limitations as well. I think it's just managing and navigating those desires and limitations.
Let me take that another step with you, because you were originally trained as a journalist and practiced journalism and transitioned to art. And I'm wondering, how do you see the kind of activity you do as a journalist and how the work you're now doing as an artist as different? And, for example, objects. How do they appear in those two sort of fields differently, and what do they mean?
Well, I was in radio, first of all, mostly radio, some TV, and as a video artist, I take a certain amount of discipline from the beginning, middle, and end, and researching a story and then completing it. And so there is a real sense of discipline with me. There's not this sense of being completely open-ended. I feel like I'll figure things out, you know, in one set of work and then take that on to another set of work and then take that on. I'm not that open-ended, which I do cry a little bit. I'm sort of worried about that in me. I sort of think that the journalist in me has taken over too much, and that I should be a lot more at mercy to the idea, at the mercy of the story a bit more. And just to say, that's why I became an artist, because when you're a journalist, the medium matters more than the story. You have to fit it into a particular time frame, and especially if you're doing it for a particular channel, they have a brand, and you know, that takes precedence. But as an artist, you feel like you're able to honor the actual soul of a story, or the biology. I always talk about the biology of a story. I feel like it hasn't a biology, and it's just revealing itself to you and through you. But at the same time, I don't believe in complete takeover. I believe in also having that discipline and craft. That's part of shaping that story. How would a journalist approach what I'm doing with like masks and objects? I mean, I think not too dissimilarly from how I'm doing it now. We're talking about the power of these African masks, and right now we're thinking about restitution. It's a huge issue right now in the global art world, the idea of taking objects that are in Western institutions and returning them back to Africa, and that is my concern. I'm thinking about that too, and I'm writing an essay about that, and approaching it from, you know, a journalistic perspective, apart from the ending of my essay, which I'm toying with whether I'm going to keep it in or not, and I'm allowing myself to keep it in.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, the ending is talking about spirit possession and about the power of the object, because we're talking about these objects as if they don't necessarily have power, but I want to share, I'm going to Well, if I'm doing it now, I might as well put it in the essay. I'm talking about an experience, a terrifying spiritual experience I had, having spent some time in the home of a Park Avenue African art collector, and what happened to me the next day. And I think that as an artist, I have to share that, I have to put that in there. And a journalist wouldn't say that. A journalist wouldn't talk about the terror that I experienced the next day and the thing that happened to me. But as an artist, I feel like kind of duty-bound to talk about it and to acknowledge the potential power of these objects. And I'm still scared. I don't think the art world is that open. Honestly, I think it thinks it's open, but it actually really isn't. So I'm a bit nervous about putting this in, but I think I'm gonna. I think why not? So I'll put it in. I'm gonna tell you about this weird kind of sleep paralysis experience that I had, and also talk about the fact that maybe these objects do have power. They aren't anachronisms. What is going on? Something is going on.
Andrea, you use a term called indigenous futurism. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that. At one point, in one of our previous conversations, you said something to the effect that for those who are invisible, the past is really like the future because it's so unknown. I'm just wondering if you can talk about this.
Well, it's hard to figure out where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And I think it's really important too that if nobody else cares, that at least Native people are holding on to these stories and we're going to carry them with us into the future. We can imagine what our existence will be like in the future, currently in a world that has tried to imagine us away. But we survived. So I think that it's really important that we can put some of these hopes and dreams. We can kind of tuck them away into the future without prescribing it, without. These are options, and we're going to widen our options. And in our past, maybe we've had genocide and various things that have narrowed our options. I think that's really important. We have to, imagine ourselves richly, as Anne Scott Mawade said, and that the greatest tragedy that could ever befall us is to go unimagined. And I'm assuming that he was talking about us imagining ourselves. So for me, I see indigenous futurism, which is a term coined in 2012 when the end of the world was supposed to happen, but the Mayans were like, nope, that's the renewal of the calendar. We're not claiming that the world is ending, but that in that year is when this term, indigenous futurism, was coined. And now it's kind of, spun off into its own movement. There's a lot of writers and artists and dancers and filmmakers that are making work under this kind of general term. And I know that as soon as you come up with the term, everyone wants to kill it. So we'll see where it ends up. And I'm really excited to see who the players are, see how this plays out, because there've been very few indigenous art movements in the past, and so this is really, really exciting for my community.
I remember 2012 also spawned a lot of really bad movies, and I just bring that up because I know both of you have a sort of interest in, let's say, the more exploitation side of cinema, or maybe sci-fi. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that with your work, and then Zina, maybe you could talk about it as well.
Well, you might see it again and again, this kind of this inverted mask, not in this piece, that says Mondo Kane. I don't know if anyone knows about that film. But that's one of the films that come up again and again in my work. I also was into the cannibal boom genre. It's a 1970s Italian film genre where all of these stories are the same story. There's cannibal Ferox, cannibal Holocaust, cannibal, everything you could possibly think of. And these films were pretty much the same storyline. A group of anthropologists, or a group of oil prospectors, or a group of cults, or missionaries, or Mondo filmmakers would go into either Africa or South America or parts of Asia, and they would do something very, very terrible to the indigenous people of that place. And it was all captured on film as though it was found footage. Then just killed the invading factor in very horrific ways, and really, brutal films.
Well, this is an element in your work also is anthropophagism or cannibalism.
Yeah, so I really like that as a metaphor and as far as that kind of storytelling, because it has kind of set up that idea of like the savage cannibal as being a native element. And what I think is really interesting is when you take the idea of cannibal and make it about cultural assimilation, who's eating who? We're actually the ones that are being assimilated and consumed by settlers and by colonization. So I think that it's really fitting. I know in Brazil they've had the anthropophagy movement, which was the indigenous or the native to Brazil, the population ate Europe, ate the best parts of Europe and assimilated that into what is the identity of being a Brazilian, that national identity. And in North America, the idea of the cannibal is inverse when it comes to the native population. There's a lot of Anishinaabe people who have written about the Wendigo, which is the Ojibwe or Anishinaabe winter cannibal monster who misidentifies who he consumes. So he would misidentify people as maybe their clan animal, and then not recognize their humanity and be able to consume them. So the Wendigo complex, or the idea of the Wendigo, is the colonizer. Is the colonizer consuming? It's that Wendigo spirit that lives inside the oil prospector, that lives inside the missionary, that lives inside the colonizer and settler. So that's how I'm kind of using the idea of cannibalism as kind of this inverse of being accused of savagery, but it's actually the opposite. But it's the inverse of what Brazil is doing. Is how in North America scholars have used it.
Zina, tell us a little bit about Nollywood too, because I didn't know anything about it.
Sure. Just quickly, what you were saying about this idea of stewardship and power is very interesting to me. The idea of the power of the land and the land possessing all sorts of people that are on it. If we can return to that later, I'd love to. Nollywood, it was at the beginning of my career. It launched my career as an artist. I remember I wrote an essay for the South African photographer Peter Hugo, who did a book about Nollywood, and I wrote, and this is before I was an artist, and I wrote an essay about Nollywood. And it kind of launched my art career because I was writing about Nollywood, but there were certain elements of it that wouldn't behave. It was one of the hardest things I've ever written, and it kind of took over me, and I was just like, it was like attacking me, and I was on Facebook begging people to help me to control this thing. And the reason I couldn't control it is that there was art in it. I was trying to lock down a particular narrative, but there are certain things that would not be locked down, that would not behave, and could not be locked down in terms of text. So I had to make art to deal with those certain beasts that wouldn't be tamed. So Nollywood was the beginning of understanding that art would be my vehicle to be able to express the things that I couldn't write down, I couldn't metabolize properly. So I needed art in order to do that. And so art was in the beginning of my, Nollywood was in the beginning of my work. Nollywood is I think now the second largest film industry in the world after Bollywood. I call it a kind of, soap operas and steroids, that's what happened. I think that the Nigerian film television industry broke down in the 80s, and then, the film industry was scattered into the jungle, into the forest, and then they had to survive, and they became these kind of like fascinating animals, basically, these films, which are like 5 hours long and have the world's most insane titles. I always remember like the Beyonce versus Rihanna. There's one called Hitler. There's one called Margaret Thatcher. I remember all the political ones, but it's very kind of emotive ones, normally like romance novels, but there's some very interesting political ones too. And so, obsessed with Nollywood and its failures and its exigencies, and so. But then I went to the Niger Delta and that kind of stopped, so I'm really upset. I'm sort of like keep thinking about where is that interest, where in the sci-fi there's a lot of sci-fi in these Hollywood films, and they're, you know, rendered very crudely in terms of very lo-fi kind of special effects, and they're wonderful. It's like my favorite. I like the Hollywood from the 1990s. They're so much more lo-fi and so much more honest. There's something really wonderful about it. I think right now Hollywood has really progressed, and people really love, you know, they're thinking of developing. We're going to be on Netflix, and they are on Netflix, and they're on, you know. But it's too bad. I think it's important that we develop, and that's great, but I'm actually much more interested in the expression that I saw in the kind of early 90s in Hollywood. There's something there that's very elemental and very sort of Nigerian that I'm very excited by. But it's not in my work now, and I'm really bummed about it. I'm just thinking, where is my interest in this kind of production? And my other dirty secret, seeing as I keep talking about dirty secrets, is that I watch Ancient Aliens. And I'm like, where is Ancient Aliens in my work? I don't understand where is this in my work? And it hasn't been in my work. So hopefully not the next project, but maybe the project after that will sort of have some much more zany kind of elements in it. So I think it's important. I've been working a lot more with the cotillion right now. Oh, that's a bit alien-y. I made some alien references in...
I think that counts.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. So there's some of that, using our masking traditions and sort of updating them slightly, so there's some alien stuff. But mostly my work is cotillion. It's like, I film people kissing, crying, praying, eating so far. So nothing sci-fi about that, but hopefully in the future there might be.
That's a topic I wanted to come back to, since cannibalism and eating, watching people eating is really kind of part of your practice in a very interesting way. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm just hoping we get to the bit where... whilst I was in Nigeria, as I said, I sort of didn't come as an anthropologist or as a journalist or as, you know, an NGO worker or an activist. I came as an artist. Okay, these are my eating films, some of them stills from there. And, you know, I didn't know what work would come out of me when I went there. I wasn't looking for oiler stories. I wasn't looking for oil slicks. I wasn't looking for militants that were dressed in balaclavas and forging out on speedboats to try and, like, destroy boats with their oil cargo. I wasn't interested in those stories. I was interested in something else. I just didn't know what would happen. And at one time I heard a little whisper, and that's how some of my work comes, the best work comes to me. So wouldn't it be funny if you did X, Y, Z? And at this particular moment in 2014, something said to me, wouldn't it be funny if you filmed people eating? Which is a kind of super basic, very not that interesting kind of idea. But it tickled me and it made me laugh. And I say this every talk I do, but I'll say it again. Every time something happens to me that isn't funny but makes me laugh, I know it's hit something that's important. And so, you know, it says film people eating, you think that's the easiest thing in the world, but actually it turned out to be extremely hard and actually pretty dangerous. It's quite dangerous to navigate the Niger Delta. And so I filmed people eating, and eating dishes with their hands, and they're engaging with the camera, and I didn't know what the work was until after I'd made it. I still don't fully understand, but I like to make work about things I don't understand. The process of it is part of it. But I also want to say at this point that it's not just the object, it's not just the video or the video sculpture or installation that matters. It's about the enterprise, it's about going out into the community. And I realized that part of the work wasn't just me filming people, it was putting a spotlight onto this activity. It's putting a spotlight saying that you go to the market matters. It says that bringing people together to... There's one film, which we actually do have a video of, which you might put on maybe. We filmed this man eating, and everyone gathered around. But what was so beautiful is that everyone understood it as a performance, understood it as and this isn't an African village, this is, you know, literally all your ideas about what an African village is, it is. And, you know, no one's ever been to a museum or an art gallery or anything like this, but they fully understand that this is performance and this was art. And they were all silent, watching this man get this performance. And every time we do this happens, the sense that people understand what we're doing. And they go, you're just showing our culture. They understand that what I'm trying to do is exalt culture in some ways, and they accept it as art. And they're completely radical, that's what I discovered, and that is part of the process of learning. So this is...
Thank you, Alex.
Someone eating. One of my performers.
What is this?
It's called table manners.
Okay. It was the dish. It looked like potatoes, but I think it's something else. Yeah.
It's pounded yam.
Yeah, okay.
there any sound? No sound.
Do you present these? How do you present these in the exhibitions, please?
Yeah, so at the moment this is up at the Fowler Museum in LA, and there's 16 of these films, and I've also got a sculpture piece of a man eating a tortoise. But these ones are just presented as these monitors that are in a sort of V shape, and that one was 10 minutes long. So you know, and you need the sound as well, but it's 10 minutes long, so it's a good sense of you communing with someone from the Niger Delta. And I think because of where it was filmed as well, this idea that, you know, we are disassociated from our land, I think that's kind of what I wanted to make a piece that kind of contradicted that. I think I understand when people go into a region like that and want to talk about pollution and they want to talk about the ways in which, you know, we have problems farming and fishing, but at the same time what that does is that disassociates us from our land, it reduces the value of the land, and then other people steam in there and actually use it as an opportunity to buy out the land, and that has already happened. There's like a banana plantation from a company from Mexico that's bought the land and they're creating these kind of monocultures and sort of destroying the way that we actually farm. So I think you have to be very careful about those kind of narratives. And so for me this is about creating a connection, sort of like this action of eating is like this act of suturing people into their environment, but also this act of insistence amidst this kind of degradation, the sense that, you know, there is nourishment going on, there is this sense of stewardship, there is a sense of understanding the land that we come from, and so bringing that together and forcing people to sit there and commune with people from where we're from. You know, up until 2010, a quarter of all of America's oil came from the Niger Delta, but no one knows where it is, no one cares. And so this is an opportunity to sit down and commune with someone from that particular region.
So by and large, this work would be seen by an audience that's not in Nigeria.
I've only shown it in Nigeria once, but it's been shown in lots of different places, and yeah, only in Nigeria once. And it's so much fun watching it with Nigerians. They just like, it's like watching sport, like boxing. It's hilarious.
Andrea, you also have dipped into cinema or video making, and you do this sort of terrific piece called Let. This is a still from it. The art of reverse incorporation. I think that was a Freudian slip. But one of the things you talk about here is you actually had people go into a museum that had Native American objects, and these were Native people, and they would read the wall labels and then kind of digest, cannibalize, and change the wall labels. Right? Can you talk a little bit about the project?
So this is back in 2016, and if you cannot remember that year, or maybe blotted it out of your minds. So the project led an act of reverse incorporation. The museum let me rewrite a lot of the wall labels, and it was supposed to be a project of me doing this work and myself making this video. And we decided over time that it would be much better to create a pool of people, and we called them stakeholders, that had a cultural investment within the institution. It's an ethnographic, it's primarily an ethnographic collection. They have, you know, Africa, the Oceanias, and the Americas in one department. So it was that particular group. So of the stakeholders, we had people from, you know, various groups. We went through and toured the museum and read the wall text out loud. And do that. If you're a school teacher and you're working with critical minds, read wall text at these types of institutions out loud, and you will hear where the biases lie. When you see terms like foreign, you know, exotic, those were all terms that were used in these wall texts. when terms of difference come up, you understand like who is normalized in these contexts and who is other very clearly. So we went through, and instead of me writing the wall text, which I didn't write a single one, I had the stakeholders write wall text on whatever objects they wanted. It didn't have to be, and a lot of them weren't even in the ethnographic collections. They were in modern wing, because there's a lot to say. There's a lot for Indigenous and people of color to say in the modern wing. And so they rewrote the text. It was the first time that the Art Institute had the words Black Lives Matter in the African collection, and it was something the white curator couldn't do. It actually had to be something that was a bit of a takeover. So then the stakeholders read their wall text, and they made this film with their voices narrating the removal of some monstrous objects that I made. These are sculptures. And then we went into the grounds of the museum and we buried those objects. Like the earth buries all narratives. We all end up in the ground. And that's part of this ongoing thing within my own work with museums, is that museums are a foreign landscape if every object is your local point. Gregory Rose, an artist in Minneapolis, wrote about these different effigy figures in the African collection, and he said that these objects were stolen from Africa, as his ancestors were stolen from Africa, and how this is a power figure that is supposed to protect a community, and it's put on display behind glass. Its power is put in a plexiglass box on display like his ancestors were. And I think it's a really important, that was before Black Panther came out with that museum scene, and I feel like I kind of, I don't know, my project came out in 2016. But then we aired that, or we screened the film at the MIA, the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, 6 days after the election. And the entire audience was weeping, and I think the audience showed up because there was a lot of hurt and confusion. I think they were looking probably for healing, and I don't know that we provided that for them. I think, but I think it was a really good thing for the museum to witness this as well. And then on a curious side thing, apparently museums during World War II, when Europe and Paris was being firebombed, museums would take objects and bury them to keep them safe.
Put them on trains and take them into mountains.
Yep. So,
do you think, this is a question for both of you, and maybe it's something the audience will want to think about and talk about. Do you think it's possible for museums to actually decolonize?
So a new term that's kind of coming out as opposed to decolonization, because decolonization is like, it's like a process. It's not an end post. It's not but a lot of people are using the terms indigenization or other terms that doesn't center the colonizer, because if you're decolonizing, you're still repeating that again and again, whereas indigenization, we can center ourselves in our own desires and joys and dreams and not have it be against, but in a very, pro-positive way, where we're centering ourselves unapologetically and not having to address the colonizer's needs and teach the colonizers, but celebrate ourselves. So I don't know if the museums I think it's a colonial structure. I think it kind of came out of that, of conquesting lands, collecting stuff from those conquered lands, and then showing them off like a trophy. Like look at what we got from the colonies. So it's very clear that it comes from that. And I think doing the inverse of that is, it's still. I'm not sure. I think that they can try, and I think they should keep trying.
If the Met or if the Louvre, just got rid of all the things that they had stolen from other people, there would be almost nothing left in the museum at this point. So I think I'm serious about the question too. It's like, well, how does this process happen and you still retain this idea of a collection or a museum that collects things?
That would make a lot of space for contemporary native artists who are
That's right,
often
yeah.
denied contemporaneity.
That could be the indigenization process, maybe to start with cleaning it out.
So I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment because my latest show is about contemporary traditional art. And I mean, the very idea of a museum, in a way, is a hugely colonial idea. And it started off about showing the spoils from the countries that you colonized. But then there was a taxonomic shift, and then it got recontextualized as art in the kind of early part of the 20th century. And I'm just thinking about what does it mean to see something as art? These objects, seeing these objects as art, is it completely apolitical? Is that possible? Has that shift happened, and has that righted the wrong by viewing these objects as art and seeing them as aesthetic objects? Or do they always act as moral objects? And that's what I'm thinking about right now. And also I'm questioning this idea of like the return, when you're returning these objects and they return to new museums. Like we're building these museums in Africa, but actually a lot of those kinds of objects, we're talking about these well, they're old objects in Europe, but they're still being made actually on the continent. So it's like, how are we really relating to those particular objects? Because what if we're still making those objects, and that's what my show is showing? It's like we're still making these objects. So are we only going to relate to the ones that happen in Europe? Are we seeing something more special than the ones that the Europeans have collected? And if so, why? Why are we privileging their point of view in terms of that art, and why aren't we relating to this art in the same way? And actually, is a museum completely besides the point? Is that not what we should be doing at all? But then also the idea of like decolonization is that, what are you left with? Who are the people that you're left with? You're left with the people who are utterly modern and who have shifted, who have changed. So, the response to those objects is they're not the same. They're not seen, they don't necessarily have this repository of power. A lot of people are Christians now, for example, and a very particular kind of Nigerian Christianity, which by the way is exported, so there's a certain sense of, yes, they were colonized and they changed their religion, but then there's a certain kind of Nigerianness when it comes to, and Ghanaianness when it comes to Christianity, that's actually being exported. So there's a sense of like, okay, when you decolonize Africans, what are you left with? Who are you left with? I'm thinking about this as, there's an organisation called Culture of Life Africa, and this is a woman who was on some famous BBC interview talking about, she was very displeased with, I think it's the Gates Foundation and their desires for, what's the word, maternal, allowing abortions and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Women's rights.
Women's rights, I suppose. And she's very anti the idea of like making these abortions available. She's saying that's a colonial idea that, African life is family-centered, and actually she's pro-Trump and, pro-life. And she sees herself as a decolonial. So the question of, what you're left with, who are these decolonial subjects is extremely broad. And do these decolonial subjects, are they going to relate to these objects in the same way? I don't know that they're going to necessarily do that. So to decolonize the museum, I think it's as simple as having contemporary voices, more contemporary voices in, having ceremonies, which I hate, but also, if you want to actually do that, having a ceremony and activating these objects is another way of doing it. I mean, that's so crass, I think, but whatever. But that's a way of decolonizing if you want to go there. But then there's also my honesty. I love the white cube. I have, you might see, I'm fascinated by the white cube. I'm Nigerian, I'm British, I'm Western, and I'm African. And I love the white cube, and I want to use the white cube, and I do use the white cube to interrogate.
Is the boys' quarters as a kind of white cube?
It is a white cube, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh no, that's all sorry. I mean, some pictures are coming up, and you see it is a white cube. It's sometimes a black cube. Right now, it's a white cube with a blue floor. Before it was a pink cube. So yeah, it is a white cube space.
Tell us a little bit more about that curatorial project.
Yeah, so basically, when I went back to Nigeria, I was making work, but I didn't want to just make work that I made in Nigeria and then, that went out to museums in America and Europe. So I wanted to had this quaint idea of doing activations on the streets. And my family were like, no, I don't think so. And I thought, okay, shall I just do it in the boys' quarters, which is like the I'm going to sound really bourgeois now, but the servants' quarters in the homes, and some certain homes in Nigeria. And then again, that was seen as not particularly safe, because if you're inviting strangers into your compound, that's not safe at all. Certainly not safe in Port Harcourt, where I'm from. So I decided to take over my father's old office, and I turned that into an art space. And for me, that actually ended up being really important, because it's about talking about what his legacy is. So I think his legacy as an environmentalist and human rights activist was seen in very activist terms. But I always wanted art to be part of that legacy and conversation. He was a writer, he was a poet, he did a massive TV show that was one of the biggest shows in Nigeria and Africa in the 80s. And I think that art is, he wasn't into the kind of contemporary art that that I'm interested in, but I think that had to be a part of the conversation. So I think that art is part of our armor in order to tell stories and control stories. This is the space. So, so knocked everything out, covered windows, got rid of the tiles. Like, Africans love tiles on the floors, and I can't stand them, so I gleefully dug those up, and then we poured concrete on the floor and had a white cube. And within that space, we tell all sorts of different stories through art. And it's about the relationship between self and environment, and really interrogating that idea. Because again, I talked about decolonizing environmentalism as well, and I think whatever goes on in there is the act of doing that. Because what we're trying to do is sort of understand what is our environmentalism in a place like the Niger Delta or in Africa. It's actually quite complicated. It's not that straightforward.
I think you made the statement, what are we without oil?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of some people there, I don't know, I feel as if they just want to survive, and they're, a lot of Nigerians are raging capitalists anyway. They want to survive, they want, some of them, like, their favourite place to go is Dubai. The idea is that, should it look like Dubai? And I mean, for me, that's a horror. I would never want that. And I don't, I would like to divest from fossil fuels generally, but not everyone thinks that necessarily. And also, I'm thinking about people's relationship with things like trees and rivers. I was reading one of these, like, Christian texts saying that if your child is obsessed with the river, if your child is obsessed with the trees, that means that they're animistic, and that's some. So our old religion,
which is a bad thing.
Which is a bad thing, yeah. It's not anti-Christian, and our relationship with our land was written and inscribed in these religions. And so now that Christianity has come in, it's sort of complicated that relationship and stymied that energetic flow. So I just, we have to think about ourselves, how we relate to our environment in our own way. We have a lot of hard questions to ask ourselves. We can't just take on board what any foreign environmental NGO comes and says. It's just not going to work. We have to get right with ourselves first. And so that's what the gallery is partly about foregrounding forms of art storytelling in the Niger Delta, either by local artists or foreign artists. So.
Andrea, you're also interested in environmental issues. Does this ring true, and does this religious issue also kind of come into play to some degree?
Christianity it is a terrible colonial force, and it is kind of, there's a lot of people that will use stewardship of the earth that's in the Bible, and they will support environmentalism through the Bible. I don't really know. I remember that when I was, Ojibwe culture and history class, I had a teacher who said he's teaching Ojibwe culture and history, but from a set of ideals. This is, our old time spirituality. This is our, medicine lodge. This is our, our old ways of doing things. But he's like, today, when we survey Ojibwe people, 85% of Ojibwe people are Christian. So when we say Ojibwe culture and history, Ojibwe culture is overwhelmingly Christian. And so, but then there's a lot of people who have found ways of blending the two. And as far as decolonization is, you can't undo colonization. I don't think that decolonization is undoing that. So, but I don't really want to talk about Christianity. I don't want to center that. But it is a problem. It is. We have, Native boarding schools, American Indian boarding schools, where the kids were taken away from families. All of the kids were kidnapped and put in boarding schools. And they had graveyards at schools. where our kids were put in the ground because they did not survive the conditions of boarding schools. And this was every single Native kid being put for generations in a boarding school to have the language beat out of them. Our language is where all of our theory and philosophy and the worldview lives. If you have that beaten out of you, their mantra was kill the Indian, save the man. I just wanted to learn the language. And it is interesting how when you really throw yourself into it, and I've had the privilege of throwing myself into it, how it changes how you see things. It changes your relationships to things. We don't have gendered pronouns, which would be easy for a lot of people if everyone would just speak Ojibwe. And then we have, instead of masculine and feminine verb noun agreement, like in much of European languages, we have animate and inanimate verb noun agreement. So if you're talking about an animate being, then you would use the animate verbs to complement it, and drums are animate, certain rocks are animate. A lot of things that in the West is not seen as animate are, and so you would talk about them like you would talk about a living being. And then, it changes how you relate then to various things, because you have to know whether or not it's animate or inanimate to correctly speak the language. So.
Keep thinking about food, how I'd love to try Ojibwe food. I think a lot
Wild
of
rice.
Well, the thing is that so you're talking about language and coding your worldview. I think also food and the way we put ingredients together, there's something that's encoded in that. I always think that there's something that happens to you when you eat another culture's food that you can't necessarily put a name to or understand. It's just working on a cellular level, and I'm interested in that. And so I always think that food is this way of preparing something or beginning a conversation somehow. And I've done a little bit of reading about native foods and modern iterations of that, and I would love to see more of that. That's something that I would, I want to ingest that worldview through food somehow.
I think we may have time for one more question, and let me know if you think this is too sentimental or personal. But I noticed that both of you have sort of a certain relation with your fathers. You, of course, sort of very powerful, but the pipe that he'd like to smoke, I see appears in some of the images that you use. And you talk about another point where your father was chewing dogwood instead of, and I'm just wondering how it plays out in your work, that intimate relationship.
It's yours.
Well, I feel like I talk about him a lot. I can't ever say too much because I think that what happened to him was just beyond dreadful, and
People here may not know that much about the coup, but
yeah, you can look it up. But the way he died was horrible, and he shouldn't have died. And so I don't think I can ever, in a way, I won't ever stop talking about it. I will never stop. I won't apologise at all about what happened. And it's the reason I became an artist. I didn't know that I would be an artist if he hadn't been killed in the way that he was. I don't think that would have happened. I kind of fought a lot with him as well. We didn't agree on a lot of things, and I think that he said that art always had to be political, which, and I sort of rail against activism. I kind of didn't want to do this talk because I was so afraid that I'd be viewed as an activist. I don't want to be an activist. I'm not interested in activism, and yet I keep getting told I am one. And so he was one, and I kind of wish that he wasn't on some level, but I'm so proud of what he did at the same time. And so I'm laying bare all my issues here right now. It belongs with my shrink, not with all of you, but in a way that you ask the question, and this is what we're going to get. Issues with activism because I don't want a particular end. I like the open-endedness of art. I like not knowing. I relish the not knowing, and I think that activists necessarily have to have a particular point they're trying to get through to the world, but yeah, I can see ways in which I might be one. But I used to call myself an unactivist. You said you just went to an unconference, and yeah, I call myself an unactivist, but at the same time, on some level, I must be. But my conversation with him is saying, well, art has to be a part of that conversation. And yeah, I just feel as if I can't get rid of it. It's just this thing I can't get rid of. This thing happened and I can't get rid of it. And I make this work over there in order to try and deal with it and to stop it from strangling me. But I can't, so I don't, I feel a bit sort of Like, how can I make work about, how do I make work when I'm in America? I live here. How do I make work when I'm here? All my work is made over there and I don't live there most of the time. How do I make work here? And it's this thing that's always dragging me. So it's, it's like I can't escape my past. So it's this thing where I don't want to, I never want to, but at the same time I'm desperate to. So I'm in turmoil right now. Thank you.
Well, my dad is where I get my Ojibwe-ness from, and that's been really important. His mother, my grandmother is really important in my life as well. I'd say that I have a lot of father figures that aren't necessarily directly related to me. That are
Your mother is Scandinavian, Norwegian, your mother?
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parentage that I'm not sure of. That's way too much information for you guys. But there's a lot of people in my life, older men, that I've considered father-like. We have in Ojibwe culture, we have adoption ceremonies, and I have two Ojibwe names. Peter Kelly, whose Ojibwe name was Togasana Koikunu Aban. He died in 2012, and he was very kind of instrumental in my philosophical kind of upbringing. And Dennis Jones, who I was just hanging out with, and who I talked about, was a teacher of mine who brought up the Christianity argument as far as Ojibwe history. I have a lot of older men in my life that have been very, very father-like. And my dad is also an artist, so it's been very helpful. But I don't think, he would be thrilled to hear me talking about him. But love you, Dad.
Okay, well, thank you both very, very much. We're going to open it up now to questions from the audience. It's a little hard for us to see up here, but there is a microphone here, and there's a microphone here, and we have a little bit of time for questions. So. I can ask another question if everybody's ready yet. All right, how about I ask you guys one more question? Maybe people will be thinking about this. This is a tough one. Okay. And this has to do with the arena of the arts itself, because it is such a sort of complicated and often compromised arena that we know, I don't need to tell you about art washing and all the things that are going on, the unionization that's being attempted in the new museum, also in Guggenheim and other things. Not that you're activists, because I wouldn't necessarily put that on you, but how do you see the important stories that you want to tell working themselves through such a kind of compromised field? How do you deal with that? Has that become an issue?
Maybe we were talking about this before. This is the economy part of the sovereignty and economy, which you guys are all signed up for and didn't get. I think artists are very fluid in who we make friends with, who we befriend, who is in our communities. I think that I will go to the homes of some very, very wealthy art donors and collectors, and I'll also hang out with artists that are having a hard time, making rent or buying a meal. So I feel like economically, artists have a lot of access to various people, and we also are very all over the place as far as our economies. There are very wealthy artists and there are poor artists, and I think that what that affords us is, it's a different, like if we were the anthropologist, it gives us a glimpse into some of these structures. There was a project I did called The Uncompromising Hand, Remembering Spirit Island, and I don't know that many artists get to hang out with the Army Corps of Engineers, but for this project, this lock and dam system downtown Minneapolis was decommissioned few years ago, and they commissioned artists to use that space, to project in that space, or to make art around that space, that decommissioned lock. When they built that lock and dam system on the Mississippi River, they destroyed something called Spirit Island, which was a Dakota sacred place. They not only chopped up this limestone island and got rid of it, they scooped it up, they dredged it to make it deep enough for these boats to get into the lock system. A lock is like a boat elevator to get it up the falls, because the Mississippi River is in that area, in Minneapolis, there's the falls. So they, over the course of several decades, they destroyed this Dakota sacred place. The Dakota were living in exile after the Dakota Uprising and the Dakota Wars of 1862. So that's some history that maybe a lot of you don't know about. But so me being an artist, I had years before had mentioned this Spirit Island to the person that was in charge of this commission. And so when they had this funding available, this guy reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in writing a proposal? We'll pay you for the proposal. And I told them that I would write the proposal because people need to know that Spirit Island existed. But I'm really busy and I don't really actually want to do the project. I just want to write the proposal. I just want to formulate these ideas. So I wrote the proposal, and of course it was accepted, and it's the uncompromising hand that's in the lock. That says Dakota Makote, which is Dakota for Dakota land. And then you can kind of see if it's red, that's Spirit Island being projected behind it.
That's a projection.
Yeah, it's a projection in the lock. So the text and the island and its various states of being destroyed are projected kind of flowing down in the direction of the river. And we didn't know this at the time when I was making it, but it was actually being projected at scale in the place where the island used to be. So when we're getting ready to go out to present this on its opening night, my friend Gwen Westerman, who's a poet and an artist, I asked her, she's also Dakota, I asked her to come speak at the opening, and she showed up, and I just found out a few minutes prior, but apparently there was a number of people from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the audience, and so this is well Dakota. Access Pipeline was in its, kind of at its maximum of violence. And that was because of the Army Corps of Engineers not doing their jobs and putting Dakota people's lives in water at risk. And so I leaned into Gwen and I said, oh, by the way, your audience is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, good job, or good luck. And she kind of gave me one of those looks like, you could have warned me a little bit sooner, but she was happy to have their ear. And this is an access point, that I think sometimes artists are afforded because they might not expect this kind of truth.
How did they respond? Did any of them speak up? Or?
No, and I think it was very well received. It wasn't a space where they really could have spoken up. There was a lot of people who hadn't known that an island had existed there. It's a very beautiful limestone. It was very beautiful. I was using the photographs from it, from the Historical Society. So there was a lot of people who were tweeting about it, and they were just angry to learn that there was this beautiful place, and that it was they felt like it was that they felt personally kind of blighted by it. So
I think Rick Lowe, the artist, often talks about the idea of trespassing, and that the artist gets to kind of trespass between different kinds of stations and situations in life. So what do you think?
I've been thinking a lot about, what is art without rich people, Yana Peel, who's just exited her position at Serpentine in London, sort of wrote this, or did this exit interview, and at the end, it's just I wish I could look at it that while we were talking, but she talked about how we run the risk of basically alienating all these wealthy people who are basically funded. That's what she was saying, you run the risk of alienating your funding source. That's basically what she said. And I always wonder, well, what does it look like when we start to weed out all of those who have problematic who've gained, ill-gotten gains, or, they have problematic sources of wealth. And when we bring them out of the conversation, what's going to happen to art? What does art look like? And, does it suddenly become, in the UK, we have the British Council or the Arts Council, and, art is decided by committee, and then you're given money to, which I always think affects the power of the art on some level. I don't know, there's something about the relationship between sort of patron and artist, which I'm not comfortable with. I haven't cracked the code at all. I'm really upset about it. Okay, there it is, I just said it. I'm upset about it because it's like a game, and it's a game that I haven't won, but also it's a game that's deeply problematic, but it's still this game. And, we're talking about this, but we in Nigeria and lots of parts of Africa, we're trying to get wealthy Africans to behave like the other wealthy people in the West who are financing art and doing what they're doing with art. We're trying to do the same thing, and we're talking about restitution of objects and, what are the structures with which we're going to show and preserve these objects. So it's a relationship that we have to think about, and that I haven't cracked the code of how to get money out of rich people. That hasn't happened yet to me. But I don't know
if you could get rid of all the rich people, what would the art world be?
What would it look like? What kind of art would be produced? Because the whole point is also them funding work that's very kind of oppositional to them and their worldview, and it's a vanity, but it also produces all kinds of art. It really does. It doesn't. I don't know that it's failed in terms of producing wide varieties of art, and it's created this art landscape. It's a game. It's a game, because I'm thinking about what art making was. Because of the show that I'm curating in Nigeria right now, I'm thinking about what we produced art for. And there wasn't a huge economy around it. It's specifically for either religious purposes or performative purposes, and they're like handicrafts almost. But then this other art that is a product of the Western world and a certain economy, it does different things. It tears apart the fabric in different ways, and I feel like we need rich people to do that. I don't know, but I'm going to put that out there and hope that someone will actually go to the mic and ask a question. Shall I just land on a point? Shall I just say?
I think so.
I'm scared about rich people. Oh, don't quote me, but yeah, let's go with that.
Well, if we have Eat the Rich artwork, you can film eating, and I'll provide the cannibal element to that artwork.
I think things are being cooked up here that are quite interesting.
I think art without rich people would be dance. It would be celebratory. I think it would be more communal, perhaps.
And be any good.
Well, I'm a terrible dancer, so I don't know. But I think it would. I think there was someone years ago said something about. I don't have a source. This is terrible. About how even in the Nazi concentration camps, there was still art being made. If you are compelled to make art in that circumstance, then there's something else about art that's outside of an economy. There's something else there. There's some medicine, or there's something that compels people to make something, or to produce something, or to have art as some kind of an exchange that goes beyond the means to financially take care of ourselves.
I think we have one question.
So you were talking about dance, and I'm a movement artist. I'm from Puerto Rico also, so I want to ask, because it's kind of urgent, talking about telling our own stories. And as an art maker that works with the body, it's in the now. We were thinking about past and future, and the art of dance is very much in the now, and it's very difficult to sell or package, or how does it exist in the... Anyway, I have questions that I feel are really urgent, that have everything to do with the topic at hand. And I'm thinking about the stories that are out there after Maria and how we're in the spotlight because of Maria. But this is also threading into climate change and the whole conversation which has to do with, it was fascinating for me to hear this whole decolonization, how not to use the word to try to pinpoint elsewhere. And then it was also fascinating, I don't know what my question is, but I do have a sense of urgency and wanting to put Puerto Rico and the body in the map, and the time now also, and relating that to the art world and what we're making art for, because it's fascinating to hear, like, I don't want to be an activist, and I'm like, well, then I go like, why are we making art? I want to see a real change in the world, and I'm a dancer, and I want more people dancing because I think that feeling abundant and resourceful and coming together in community, in the body, in the now, has some power way beyond economical and whatever power structures that we take so serious. And I think that art also has the potential to engage us in play and imagination. And I don't know, we're here to evolve, right? So art has that power to put a little seed into our minds and psyches to collectively imagine other possibilities and futures. I don't know, I feel this is a very urgent conversation for me, being a colony in a post-colonial world. The tension is very real, and if it's not decolonizing, what is it? I have many questions.
Are you familiar with Lois Simon Center? Are you probably here in the Lower East Side? Lois Simon Center?
See,
yeah, because
I live and make art in Puerto Rico, but yes, I'm connected to the
because
diaspora.
they're doing such great work that sort of combines activism, environmentalism, culture, and art. Just a lot. The intersection of what you're talking about, it seems to me, is going on in Puerto Rico in a really big way right now, especially since Maria, but not just since Maria, since the economic crisis, which people forget is the real tragedy behind it. Thank you.
And then it's also related to women's gender issues and women violence. It's kind of really intersectional. So anyway.
Thank you. Carlson.
I mean, I was thinking about art in a decolonial, say a pre-colonial environment, and sometimes I wonder if there's a certain encoding of art, and encoding how you're supposed to express yourself. It isn't as free as the art you might find in a kind of post-capitalist society, because it has a particular job to do. There's an utter conservatism in the pre-colonial world as well. There are some movements, there are some shifts, but it's pretty conservative in many ways. So I think there is a danger of sort of like eulogizing or sort of thinking that everything was so much better in that way. I think that art is used when you see tensions, when you see growth and developments. The art is produced in order to respond to it and to give yourself space and to give yourself room. So I don't know that the art that might have been made before necessarily was that you were allowed to be even that imaginative. I'm wondering if you're just bound into certain ways of behaving because codes and structures are much more strict. So that's something that I think about, that's something that I want to consider.
Probably nostalgia. I think we have another question, sir.
First, I want to just say thank you for speaking about your work. And I just wanted to ask a question. I've been thinking a lot recently about the ghost dance. And that the ghost dance is not practiced by many people anymore, but obviously some people think it has failed. But then I was sort of relating it to hip hop, and that there are all these different ways that the ghost dance has different lives. Nollywood could be an example of that as well. And I wondered if you guys would sort of talk about, and I don't know if you know Zina, about the ghost dance, but this relationship between ritual, dance, art, and removing patriarchal control.
When we're thinking about monetizing it, that's when the patriarchy comes in. I think if it exists for itself, then it does the job it's kind of supposed to do. This is when we start to try and, even sharing it necessarily, sometimes it gets distorted and it enters into an idea of an economy. But there is something that happens when it just happens spontaneously and within a certain group of people. you're talking about dance and freedom, and I think that we have the freedom to do that. We have the energies to already do that. And I just think that when we start to turn it into groups of people, organizations creating spectacles and sharing that, and then we suddenly enter into a whole different modality and an economy as well, and that's where the problems get set in. So, but I think, dance and all these things that you're talking about, they can exist for themselves. I think they're happening all over the place. We might not know about them. And there are problems inherent with not knowing about that too. But I think that they do exist and they are existing without necessarily our knowledge. But I just think that opening things up starts to open ourselves up to all sorts of problems and positive things.
Well, I've written on Indigenous futurism. Well, I wrote an article on it, and I brought up the ghost dance as it is Indigenous futurism well before we had a term for it. When Wokova, the prophet, dreamt up this dance or had this vision for this dance, it was, the idea behind it was, if we practice this dance, if we dance this dance, that North America will roll up like a rug and it'll shake out, and all of the buildings and development and settlers and all of this that has happened to North America will cast off this rug, maybe go back to Europe, and that the rug would then, roll out North America, and the buffalo would come back, and all of our ancestors and the people who had died in genocide would come back from the ground. And that was his imagining of a future. That was his imagining of things kind of going back to this place prior to settler colonialism. And he did that in, the 1800s. That was his Indigenous futurism. Now, practicing the ghost dance got a lot of people killed. And we have massacres, Wounded Knee, for dancing. The US government banned all dance. You watch Footloose, it's like, what a ridiculous story that a town could ban dancing. But the United States did, and it was illegal to dance and practice Native American religions until the mid-1970s. Because dance was so threatening to the US government. I'll tell you quickly about Tailfeather Woman, who was a Dakota woman living in exile in North Dakota, and she hid in a swamp for 4 days and 4 nights in the wet water of the swamp. And while she was in there, fasting and not eating, waiting for the cavalry to fast as they slaughtered her people, she had a vision where a woman came to her and taught her how to make the big drum. So she took down all of the instructions for how to make a big drum. When the cavalry passed, she made one of these big drums and brought it to the Mille Lacs community in northern Minnesota. And the Mille Lacs are Ojibwe, and Ojibwe and Dakota people had fought and killed each other for a very long time. She brought the big drum and the dance instructions for it, told the Mille Lacs how to make it, and the Mille Lacs accepted this as a treaty. The treaty was a dance. And as long as the Ojibwe people practiced the big drum and held these celebrations, and as long as the Ojibwe danced, it was this pact between us that we had to quit killing each other because the cavalry was coming for all of us. So our treaties were written in this object of this big drum and in our dance. And that is the origin of the powwow. A lot of people don't know that about the big drum, that it came from Tailfeather Woman. She made it. And now if you go to a powwow, women are banned from playing it. That's colonization.
Well, this has been a beautiful conversation, it really has. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Zina. Thank you for your time.
Everybody those thank yous. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Zina. Thank you, Andrea, for your thoughtful and powerful reflections. I'm leaving with a lot to think about, and I'm certain I am not the only one. And also thank you to all of you for spending your Tuesday night with us. And I also want to share that if you want to learn more about our upcoming programming, because we have a lot on the books, I invite you to visit the Creative Time website. And you will find more information on our final discussion in this series, Speaking Truth to Health and Gender, which is taking place in September. And of course, the 10-year anniversary summit itself, happening November 14th through 16th. Tickets go live next month. I hope to see you all there. Thank you and good night.